As a child of the 1980s, I sadly missed out on growing up around the infancy and subsequent booming of the progressive rock revolution of the 1970s, and of course I've had to live it vicariously through my older, wiser and more knowledgeable peers. But luckily for me, with Dominic Sanderson's incredible sophomore album of Blazing Revelations, it's the summer of 1974 all over again, and this time everyone can enjoy it live and in full colour. Guys, gals and non-binary pals, my name is Ian, this is Rhyme Signatures, and we are once again opening the lid on the best new releases in prog, rock and metal. Okay, so let's be real, gentle viewer. As I said previously in my review of Jacob Roberge's The Passing, I know I'm not who you normally come to for progressive rock reviews. But I gotta tell you, 2025 is so far feeling like it is the year of prog rock for me. The last few years I've been embracing black metal like a long-lost friend, but I think I'm finally entering my much-anticipated classic prog era, and it's people like Dominic Sanderson who are enabling this. But again though, due to my previous admittance to not really enjoying bands like ELP, Van der Graaf Generator, The Flower Kings, Magma, etc, how can you possibly trust my opinion on a man whose work is aping all of these great bands and more besides? I don't know, maybe you can't. Maybe I am looking at this album through the distorted lens of a man who has fully admitted that his bread and butter music choice is eyebrow-igniting heavy metal, and my thoughts and feelings on something so intrinsically linked to the past greats of progressive rock don't mean a damn. You wouldn't send a sommelier to judge the beers of Oktoberfest after all, so why send a heavy metal guy to judge a prog rock album? Because it's all about perspective, baby! I can give you that other side insight, the opinion that doesn't necessarily praise an album for all the tropes that a more seasoned veteran of the genre might do. But in the interests of keeping you here, I'm going to let you in on a little spoiler for this review. I purchased a copy of the vinyl after my second listen. Blazing Revelations is absolutely bloody marvellous.
The rocks beneath, as the building behind him crumbles and rots in the face of...
Right, let's be clear with ourselves here. If you like King Crimson, Van der Graaf Generator, ELP, Yes, Genesis, etc, then this album is going to be like coming home to a long-lost friend. You're not seeing them in 20 years, but it's like no time whatsoever has passed. They've got some new stories to tell, some new scars to show off, but at the end of the day, it's the same person you always knew and loved. Now, my knowledge of the classics only truly extends so far as the big bands of the era. Most of the aforementioned are familiar to my ears, but I'm not quite so au fait with the less commonly heard bands of the era. Now every Tom, Dick and Harry's heard of Genesis, sure, but bands like Renaissance, Gentle Giant, Magma, Mahavishnu Orchestra, you're getting a little bit more specialist when you start to bring them into the conversation. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that if Dominic is crutching on some of those bands in this album, then I'm not going to know about it. But I can tell you that to my ears, this feels like the perfect blend of the more sinister and unsettling side of King Crimson with the pure English country garden whimsy of early Genesis. And it set a spring in my step that I just can't describe. Set across 4 tracks and 45 minutes of music encompassing 2 tracks per side of the vinyl, this immediately gives me a sense of familiarity to albums like Pink Floyd's Dogs, Yes is Close to the Edge, King Crimson's Red, etc, and there's not a single moment of wasted air to be found across this very tidy runtime. It's long enough to give you plenty to get your teeth stuck into and short enough for repeated listens. I'm a huge fan of this kind of length and structure. It feels practically perfect, and while I'll sometimes find myself maybe wishing for just one more shorter track to bring this up to a nice even 50 minutes or so, Blazing Revelations has never left me feeling like I'm wanting. The album kicks off very nicely with From the Weeping Cradle, and the retro keyboard sounds let you know what kind of experience you're getting yourself in for almost immediately. The first 5.5 minutes or so of this 12-minute long song really showcases the instrumental chops of Dominic and his buddies. Between mellotron, jazzy drum fills, expressive guitars, flutes and saxophones, the 1970s truly comes alive again in ways I've not felt since Luminol off of Steven Wilson's Raven That Refused to Sing burst into my eardrums back in 2013. Things progress and evolve organically, with twangy bass lines making room for some expansive areas of texture and space, and it all feels incredibly well laid out and exploratory. It feels like across the album, for every moment of showboating technicality, there is an equal amount of respite and calm to balance it out into an album that is honestly a true wonder to listen to. Honestly though, one of the things that kind of took me by surprise on the album was just how hard it grooves at times, making for more than a few truly memorable moments. And when you consider how obtuse a genre that classic style progressive rock can be, that is no small achievement. I like melody, I like something I can hum along to, an a cappella in the shower. But let's be real, most old school prog rock is memorable for how angular it is rather than for its melodic properties, which is one of the areas that I feel Sanderson has dramatically improved over his influences in. I mean, okay, sure, it's still a complex soup of 1,000,001 ideas going on, and not everything lands, but for the most part there's very few weak moments to be found on the album. I do feel at times that the first couple of tracks can be a little bit too chaotic for me if they catch me in the wrong mood, but they're always a fun time, even if they can be a little overwhelming at times. Special mention does have to go to both Dominic's guitars and Andy Freisel's saxophone and flute work though, as these really do feel like the running through lines of the album around which everything else fits. Now there's just so much creative interplay between the instrumentation across the album though, be that the incredibly tight drumming from Jacob Hackett or the laser-focused grooves of Tristan Appley's bass. There's never a single moment on Blazing Revelations where I could ever say I was bored or that the music wasn't doing something cool or interesting. Okay, so I briefly touched on the fact that not everything on the album lands for me. Now I must stress that this is entirely down to personal preferences rather than there being any actual technical problems with what I'm hearing. So anyone who knows progressive rock will no doubt be familiar with Peter Hamill's love it or hate it vocal style and delivery, and I have to say that Dominic kind of feels like he's cut from a very similar, albeit sufficiently different cloth. Now I suppose the nearest equivalent I could compare Sanderson's voice to is kind of 50% Hamill to 50% Greg Lake, feeling like the unusual love child of the two of them, but never sounding quite like either. Lyrically, the album is delightfully obtuse nonsense, definitely subscribing to the high-concept pretentiousness of the era, for better or for worse, and with the numerous spoken-word passages, it mostly works. Now, I'm not a huge fan of spoken-word sections in music. I definitely err more on the side of melody and strong technical vocal delivery, which is probably why I don't gel particularly well with Sanderson's vocals as a whole. Now, this isn't to disparage or besmirch what he's doing on the album, though. This vocal style and delivery is pretty much pitch perfect for this type of music as you can get. It's just not particularly my own personal cup of Earl Grey. But unlike Peter Hamill, who's like nails on a chalkboard to me, I can still find plenty of moments of enjoyment out of Sanderson's vocals, just somewhat inconsistently. I do also feel that the music does lack its own unique identity at times, feeling like it is stitched together from the best parts of the bands that form its chief influences. Now, while this isn't a particularly big problem, at the end of the day this is a 1970s prog rock era revival album, and as such it's doing exactly what it's setting out to do. I'd love to hear a little bit more of what kind of a musically creative person Sanderson is. That being said, he's still a young gun and this is only his sophomore release, so I'd wager we'll start to see him coming into his own as his career progresses and he begins to colour outside the lines, shall we say. And my final complaint is more of a petulant beef, I'll be real with you, but I'm going to air it anyway. 2 fade-outs! 2! Dominic, are you trying to annoy me with your shenanigans, you silly little goose? Now, I can accept 1 in some seriously dire circumstances, but when 50% of the songs on your album require me to pretend like I know how you're gonna close off your song, then you got some splaining to do, mister. So what else can I possibly say about Dominic Sanderson's blazing revelations? I can remember listening to his debut album of Impermanence a few years back and thinking to myself, now, here's the man to keep an eye on, and by golly, I'm extremely pleased to be proven right with those thoughts. The biggest takeaway I think I can draw from this album, though, is that it is single-handedly making me more interested in exploring more music from the classic era of prog rock. If this kind of music can sound this good and this exciting to someone like me at this point in my life, just how much sensational music from 50 years ago is out there waiting for me to discover it? Sometimes you just need a talented young musician to show you the way towards everything you've been missing out on, and Blazing Revelations has been precisely that for me. I feel like I'm being slowly born again to the old school. The light of classic prog is being shone in my face by a man around 13 years younger than me, and I couldn't be more thrilled with how hard this album has hit me. Yes, I know I've got a couple of sticking points with it, boo-hoo, but I feel that perhaps in time and with repeated listens, those issues are only likely to become less and less of a big deal to me as I start to embrace the full package experience of Dominic Sanderson's unleashed and unrestrained creativity. Now, as I spoiled earlier in the review, I thoroughly recommend picking up a physical copy of this one, and I believe it was Dominic's father who did the striking cover art for this one, and I am very excited for my vinyl copy to arrive in a couple of months' time. If you're like me and you want to dip your feet more into the idea of classic prog rock, then this is about as good a jumping in point as you're going to see this year. This is all, of course, guys, just my opinion, so if you love this one, if you hated this one, please talk to me about your experience of the album in the comments down below. Please drop me a thumbs up if you like the video, please do tell all your friends about little old me, and please do consider throwing the channel a subscription if you've been enjoying my irreverent content so far. But as always, guys, until next time, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.